Hi, this is Euphoria, the digital reader. Typically, at the beginning of every month, I share my book life for the previous month, where I break down all the ebooks I picked up and read. However, July was comic book month, so instead of talking about traditional ebooks, this video is going to be all about eComics, or the comics I got. I'll be going over both the titles I added to my collection and the ones that I read. Now, moving forward, I probably won't be buying many more comic books. My main goal now is to clear out and finish the backlog I've already collected. But giving you a rating on comics presents a unique challenge. When you read a standard novel, even as part of a trilogy or a longer series, each book usually offers a complete story arc. Because I'm working through my personal collection, sometimes I'm only reading a single issue rather than a full graphic novel or a volume of collected issues, which means I don't always get a complete narrative arc. Because of that, a traditional 1 to 5 star rating just didn't feel right. I wanted a more straightforward framework that would give you an honest sense of what I thought without encompassing an ongoing storyline that for comics could sometimes be years, sometimes even decades. So I'll be using a simple 3-tier rating system to give my feelings for the comics. Pass. This means it didn't grab my attention or just wasn't very good. There are better comics out there, and if you're spending your time and your money, you could skip these. Recommend. These are solid, enjoyable books. If you've already checked out my top tier and have some extra room in your budget, these are well worth picking up. And then highly recommend. These are must reads. If you're buying comics, get these first. They represent the absolute best of the medium and completely master the art of telling a brilliant story through words and pictures. And just ones I really enjoyed. Obviously, some are going to be more to my personal taste, but this is my channel, so what you going to do? Now that we have that framework set up, let's dive into what happened in July. At the beginning of the month, I actually picked up a few new titles, and some match my recommended list of the best comics for people who don't like superheroes. So let's get started with the comics I picked up in July. This is a comic book series that I remember getting at the corner store discounted with like the top of the cover torn off. And I just really love this story. I don't remember all of them, but I've been wanting to pick them up again. I couldn't find them digitally, so what I actually did is I bought them on eBay. I wasn't able to get the originals. The original is called Doomsday Plus One, and it came out in the 70s. But they did do, Charleston did do a reprint, and they were reprinted as a Fantagraphics comic book series, and they called it Doomsday Squad, and they changed it. And that came out in the 80s. So I bought the physical versions of the Fantagraphics comic book, and then I scanned them into an e-comic. So at some point I'll be reading these to kind of refresh my memory, but I really seem to enjoy it. Squirrel Girl is one of the newer superheroes, at least newer to me. My collection always featured a lot of traditional superhero comics, so I've been actively looking for titles that offer something a little bit different. I think I got spoiled by skipping around between different genres in my regular book reading, so when it comes to comics, I realized I needed to branch out beyond the typical Cape and Cowl stories. I've heard a lot of great things about the unbeatable Squirrel Girl, specifically how she handles conflicts without just relying on the traditional bam bam knock out the bad guy formula. So that made me want to give this a shot. You will probably notice that many of the comics I'm adding this month fall outside the standard superhero vein, but I have enough of typical superhero stuff in my backlog, so I decided it was time to mix things up this month. I talked about Thirsty Mermaids by Leyh in my video about comic books for people who don't like superheroes. It seemed like an interesting story, and I knew that when I was going through that list and curating it, that I was going to pick up most of those books, if not all of them, to check them out myself. So that's what I did. I picked this one up. In the same vein as Mermaids, just because I really want to start reading some variety, I picked up Giant Days by John Allison, which was also part of the comics I looked in that were highly recommended that didn't have superheroes. When I was younger, I wasn't a real big Archie fan. For me, it was always superheroes and action comic books. But now that I'm older and I know how much Jughead and Archie and all of them have been a part of American culture, I was kind of curious to see what an updated version of the Archie mythology would be like. So it was on sale for 99¢. I figured I'd pick it up and check it out. I only have the first issue of Mouse Guard, and I know that the first series arc is actually the first 6 issues. So I bought issues 2 and 3 just so I could get a little bit deeper into the story arc to see if I wanted to get the full 6 of that first season of Mouse Guard. So I figured I'd pick these up, and if I like 2 and I like 3, then I was going to get 4, 5, and 6 to finish out that first season's story arc. I really enjoyed Batman Bruce Wayne Murderer, the collected graphic novel with all the different Batman world characters and all their little different stories and the different collected comic books. So that's why I picked up Batman Bruce Wayne Fugitive, which is the second collected graphic novel and the conclusion of that whole arc. But I was also really curious because obviously I'm familiar with Batman, but they've added a couple new characters. And one new character they added that seemed kind of interesting to me was Batgirl. I know she doesn't seem new, but basically she was just a tiny bit character. Here they seem to kind of flesh her out a little bit more, and she seemed much more stealth oriented. So anyway, she interested me, so I went and picked up a volume of her comics. I got issues 1 through 12 in the first volume of her comics. Black Widow, The Finely Woven Thread, is the first 6 issue story arc by the 2014 run of Black Widow by Nathan Edmondson. I enjoyed the first issue that I read of Black Widow, the 2014 one by Nathan Edmondson, so much that I immediately went and picked up the 6 issue story arc. I actually didn't buy the story arc itself. I just basically paid for a month of Comixology for $5.99, which was cheaper than buying the volume itself. As I mentioned many times, I'm fine with streaming my books and comic books as long as the price is right. I paid for it just to read this one, so I consider it picking it up for $5.99. And now for the comics that I read in the month of July. One thing people who don't read many comic books might not realize is that every good superhero or character gets reinvented multiple times by different writers and artists over the years. I bring that up because this volume of Red Sonja is the very first run. It's the one I have a ton of happy memories of. The series I grew up on and the one I distinctly remember reading alongside my mom and dad and my brother and my sister. They've revamped the series many times over the years, but this original run holds a lot of nostalgia for me. Reading it now, though, it's fun and it's pulpy. I don't know if I can honestly say it's that good. Revisiting it made me realize that if somebody asked me for a comic recommendation, my answer would depend on where they were in their reading journey. If they were brand new to comic books, I wouldn't recommend this. It's fun, but it's raw, simple pulp without much depth or nuance. It's essentially just hack and slash action featuring bikini clad women and loincloth wearing men fighting. As for my final verdict, as I mentioned, it's a pass. It's not great, but it's fun if you don't overthink it. It's just hard to actively recommend, and it isn't something I'd single out for someone to read. Aside from saying the art is really nice and boy can she fight, there aren't many substantial plot points to actually discuss. So, yeah, fun overall, but a pass. I don't really remember where I picked up Casino Royale, but I'm pretty sure I got it as a free promotion during a sale a couple years ago. I say that because if I had deliberately set out to experience Casino Royale, I probably would have just read Ian Fleming's original novel. But since I already had the graphic novel adaptation sitting in my digital library, I figured I'd dive in. To be honest, the story starts off quite slow and there isn't a ton of action. At first, it isn't particularly compelling, nor does it use the graphic novel format in a way that feels necessary for the narrative. The second half doesn't pick up the pace or add more action, but the storytelling does improve. The plot becomes a bit more engaging, and the writing does a much better job capturing James Bond's character, balancing his signature edge with his classic charm. Ultimately, though, this isn't something I would have wanted to pay full price for, and I wouldn't recommend it to anyone unless they're a die-hard James Bond fan. I just don't love how they translated the original novel into this comic book form. Dynamite Entertainment has adapted several other Bond books into graphic novels, but this initial entry didn't grab me enough to seek those out. It's decent, but I wouldn't call it good. My rating for this one is going to be a pass. When I came up with Comic Book Month, my main goal was to tackle my backlog. Specifically, tons of comics I bought over the years that I never opened and I just picked up and lost track of. For some of these, I was just fuzzy on where and when I got them. With ElfQuest, I knew I bought it on Amazon, but I didn't realize at the time that I picked up the complete saga, covering the entire main arc from the very first issue all the way through to the final quest. All told, it's over 700 pages, and it took me the better part of a week to finish. Since Wendy and Richard Pini started the series back in 1978, I was expecting it to feel pretty dated. It does have a cutesy art style, and I didn't think I was someone who could really get into a story about elves, little tiny cutesy elves. But I have to say, while it is a bit cheesy, it's a genuinely cool story. It has the vibe of a classic Saturday morning cartoon, but a good one. For those of a certain age, even maybe like a Ralph Bakshi kind of animated film. It's family friendly, there's no explicit nudity, no heavy cursing, and no graphic blood or gore. While there are romantic elements and some battle violence, the romance stays strictly no spice, a kiss, a fade to black, or tastefully framed silhouettes. I'd say it's great for readers around 8 or up. What I enjoyed most was that it's just a solid classic fantasy story with a Lord of the Rings or Hobbit vibe that has the characters travel all over the world. The core group of elves are the Wolf Riders, who share a deep telepathic bond with wolves, and the supporting cast is just as fun. Reading an entire cohesive saga from start to finish was just fun. I hadn't really done that before. Plus, getting over 700 pages of comic book goodness for anywhere between $12 to $16, depending on where you find it, is an absolute steal in today's market. I might not suggest it to someone who only reads comic books with superheroes, but if you love high fantasy, classic animation, or epic quest stories, this is an easy pick. My rating for the complete ElfQuest collection is a recommend. This is the first issue of Ed Brubaker's Captain America run, which ran from 2004 to 2011. Sometimes when I read a Marvel comic, my immediate thought is, oh, this is the plot from the movie. We tend to forget that those cinematic storylines were adapted from comic arcs that were written years earlier. This issue marks the beginning of the Winter Soldier storyline. Because it's issue 1, it serves primarily as setup, but it's well executed. The characters feel instantly familiar to anyone who's seen the Captain America movies, but the comic dives deeper into the exposition and background lore since it's kicking off a massive multi-issue arc. It's a very good, well-crafted comic. I would recommend it to anyone looking for a richer, more detailed version of the Winter Soldier than what we got on screen. My rating for this is recommend. Avengers Origins is a single-issue comic designed to tell a complete origin story in one go, and this particular issue covers the Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver. The Avengers Origin books don't deliver brand new lore. Instead, they gather scattered details from dozens of previous comics and combine them into one cohesive narrative. It's fine, but as an origin story, it lacks depth and isn't terribly compelling. It's pretty much what you'd expect from a standard tale about young mutants. There isn't much character development here, though to be fair, it's tough to pack real character growth in a single issue. Ultimately, it's a story I already knew. If you're looking to learn new secrets about Wanda and Pietro, you won't find them here, though you do get to see how they officially joined the Avengers in the comics. Kinda. For me, this one gets a pass. It's okay, but it's just not something I'd tell anyone they need to read. I could summarize their entire origin to someone verbally in 5 minutes. It's just a bit meh, so it's a pass for me. All-Star Comics number 8 was a total blast. Obviously, I wasn't around in 1941, but the nostalgia of these Golden Age comics is just incredible. It's the dictionary's definition of classic comic book fun: cool, goofy, and completely over the top. You get all these old school heroes, and the best part is their wonderfully underwhelming powers. My favorite is Captain Midnight, whose superpower, get ready for this, is that he can see in the dark. That's it. These heroes are taking on super low stakes crimes, and it makes for such a fun read. Was it deep? No. Was it cheesy? Absolutely. And thankfully, it avoids the uncomfortable racial caricatures you sometimes bump into when reading early era comics. It's just pure, rip roaring fun. I'm giving this one a recommend. The All Star Comics run is definitely something I want to collect more of because it's just a hoot to read. All-Star Comics number 8 was a total blast. Obviously, I wasn't around in 1941, but the nostalgia of these Golden Age comics is just incredible. It's the dictionary's definition of classic comic book fun: cool, goofy, and completely over the top. You get all these old school heroes, and the best part is their wonderfully underwhelming powers. My favorite is Captain Midnight, whose superpower, get ready for this, is that he can see in the dark. That's it. These heroes are taking on super low stakes crimes, and it makes for such a fun read. Was it deep? No. Was it cheesy? Absolutely. And thankfully, it avoids the uncomfortable racial caricatures you sometimes bump into when reading early era comics. It's just pure, rip roaring fun. I'm giving this one a recommend. The All Star Comics run is definitely something I want to collect more of because it's just a hoot to read. Returning to Gotham felt like stepping into a nice, warm bath. It was so great to be back in the Batman universe. Ed Brubaker leads the storyline with some great writing, however, it weaves in issues from Batgirl, Birds of Prey, Robin, and Nightwing, so the quality sometimes is a little bit hit or miss. If it were all Brubaker, it would be a top tier recommendation, but those extra issues do bring it back down to earth a little bit. Still, this arc really rekindled my love for superhero comics. After reading mostly non hero titles and one shots for Comic Book Month, diving into a longer established hero was about a blast. The main catch: you need to know your Batman lore. If you aren't familiar with the origin stories and Gotham's huge cast of sidekicks and characters, all the moving parts might leave you feeling a bit lost. But for established fans, it's a great ride. It even introduced me to new characters like Cassandra Cain's Batgirl, which convinced me to grab her solo run. If you already love the comic book lore, this is a high recommendation. But if you're a beginner looking to get your feet wet, it's probably a pass. You're better off starting with a single standalone run before diving into a massive crossover graphic novel like this. The first two issues of Scales and Scoundrels were solid, nice enough, but nothing mind blowing. It's a family friendly, PG 13 ish fantasy comic that anyone can pick up and enjoy as a cute, easy read. But nothing compared to top tier books. Compared to them, it's firmly B tier. The writing and art are decent, not bad by any means, but they didn't leave me eager for more. It's a recommend if you're a new comic book reader wanting to try a fantasy comic, but for comic book vets, it's a pass. I'll start by saying Barbaric is beautifully drawn. The art style is fantastic, and as a huge sword and sorcery fan, I was really rooting for it. The premise is interesting and the humor had potential, but the execution just didn't pan out for me. The writing felt a bit too modern for a sword and sorcery fantasy comic. While the art is incredible and well worth looking at, the narrative falls short. If forced to choose between Barbaric and something like Scales and Scoundrels, I'd go with Scales and Scoundrels every time because it simply tells a better story. Barbaric is a gorgeous book, but for me it's a pass. The first issue of American Terrorist is definitely setting up an intriguing story, but when I pick up a comic, I'm usually looking for something over the top, fantastical, or larger than life. American Terrorist, on the other hand, feels like the pilot episode of a grounded HBO political thriller or newsroom drama. It's well written and beautifully drawn, but it comes down to personal taste. For this kind of realistic political subject matter, I'd honestly rather watch it on TV than read it in a comic book. If you're a fan of political thrillers or showrunner style dramas, this is definitely worth picking up, but for me personally, it's a pass. Now, all my reviews reflect my personal taste, and America's Army #1 is pure, absolute propaganda, literally produced by the US Army. Surprisingly, though, it's really well done. It feels like a tie-in comic for Call of Duty or Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell. It isn't just over-the-top rah-rah flag waving. It's grounded, a well-crafted story filled with realistic military tactics and jargon. While I respect the effort and the decent art, this genre just isn't for me. Plus, if you love games like Splinter Cell or Call of Duty, you're probably already playing them rather than reading a promotional comic. If tactical, real world military ops are your thing, you might enjoy this. But for me, I'm giving it a pass. Major publishers naturally assign their best writers and artists to flagship characters like Batman, Superman, or Spider Man. Because of their core IP, the quality is practically guaranteed to be top notch 99% of the time. That really hit home for me when I was reading this 3-issue Spider Man run. The narrative is fantastic, balancing cool action, great humor, and genuinely poignant moments alongside top tier artwork. On top of the main plot, the first issue even includes 2 bonus backup stories that are just as impressive as the main story. It subtly tweaks Spider Man's iconic origin mythology, but it stays completely accessible. You don't need decades of lore to appreciate it. Whether you're a complete beginner or a seasoned veteran, this is why people read comics, for stories like these. It is highly recommended. The premiere issue of Black Widow by Nathan Edmondson delivered the high stakes espionage and thriller action I originally hoped for in the Casino Royale graphic novel. I enjoyed the first issue so much I wanted to jump right back in. My only hesitation was digital ownership. On Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books, you're locked into their respective DRM ecosystems since you can only read the series on the Kindle or the Google Play Books app. Unless a platform offers a specific perk like full digital ownership on Neon Ichiban, I try to avoid it when I can. But the first issue was fantastic, so I spent $5.99 for a month of Comixology Unlimited to finish the first 6-issue story arc. Overall, Edmondson's 2014 Black Widow run is superb. Whether you stream it on Comixology Unlimited or buy it directly through Kindle or Google Play, I highly recommend checking it out. I should note that I thought I only had the first issue of Bone because I bought this and stored it a long while ago. I have actually the complete collection, and so I got to read the story from beginning to end. Bone by Jeff Smith is truly unique. The art balances a cartoony style with surprisingly deep art, while Phone Bone feels a bit like Milo from Bloom County, naive, optimistic, and hopeful for everyone. At first, the cutesy cover had me skeptical, much like my initial reaction to ElfQuest, but it hooked me instantly. It's a perfect mix of genuine Sunday strip humor and emotionally rich fantasy. While it keeps classic fantasy tropes, it avoids standard elves and dwarves to build its own world, though it definitely keeps the dragons. The juxtaposition of cartoon characters in a realistic fantasy setting meshes together into a seamless, cohesive story for all ages. Bone was a great way to end comic book month. The humor lands, the serious beats hit, and it was a great read. I highly recommend Bone. And so here are all the comics I bought and all the comics I read in July. First, the comics that I bought. I bought Doomsday Squad issues 1 through 7. I bought The Unbeatable Squirrel Girl Volume 1. I bought Thirsty Mermaids. I bought Giant Days Volume 1. I bought Jughead number 1. I bought Mouse Guard number 2 and number 3. I bought Batman Bruce Wayne Fugitive. I bought Batgirl Volume 1. I bought Black Widow Volume 1. And then what I read this month. I read The Original Adventures of Red Sonja Volume 1. I read James Bond Casino Royale. I read ElfQuest. I read Captain America number 1. I read Avengers Origin Quicksilver and the Scarlet Witch. I read All-Star Comics number 8. I read A Contract with God and Other Tenement Stories. I read Batman Bruce Wayne Murderer. I read Scales and Scoundrels 1 and 2. I read Barbaric, Book 1. I read American Terrorist #1. I read America's Army #1. I read Amazing Spider-Man issues 692 through 694. I read Black Widow Volume 1. And then I read Bone, the Complete Collection by Jeff Smith. This was my first comic book month. I have to say I enjoyed it. Reading nothing but comics was just a really fun way to focus myself on comic book reading again. This is Ofori, the digital reader, and keep reading.